A badge of honor. Police officers and first responders wear badges to let their communities know they are here to protect and serve. But that's not how it feels today. And the stress of the job is taking its toll, taking lives through suicide and post-traumatic stress injury. A Badge of Honor podcast features the cast of the same name, Sam Horwitz and John Salerno. Sam, John, and the team offer the first responders workshops through their critical incident stress management teams and mental health liaisons to offer state-certified T-Cole credit programs that save lives. It's time to smash through the stigma. It's time to heal from your injury, and it's time to back our blue. Welcome to A Badge of Honor podcast. Here are your hosts, Sam Horwitz and John Salerno.
Hey, welcome to A Badge of Honor. Oh, I thought we couldn't hear each other.
Because no, we're good. I was waiting for you to do the intro. I mean, look, I know we've, it's been a minute, partner.
Hey, welcome to A Badge of Honor podcast with John and Sam. We are powered by the OBBM network, which you can find on almost any live streaming video podcast around, even Roku. Let me just lower my phone for a second. Hey, welcome, Sam. Today's show is so powerful because our guest today really, I just wrote an article in Blues, the Blues magazine this month, and it kind of coincides with what our author's talking about with our Leos. Our police department, our law enforcement officers across the nation are working themselves to death. There is no place in the country where we have more deaths per employer in any other job field. We're losing so many officers, not only to mental health, suicide, but to diseases and cardiac problems and all this body fatigue because we are working and not taking care of ourselves. And that is something that is an easy fix. We can change this culture of so many law enforcement officers dying in so many different ways because of the job. And I'm glad we have this guest coming on today to explain on a higher level than me and you know.
Yeah, and why don't we just bring her on? And because this is a deep dive. She wrote an incredible book called Workicide. It's a term that people were like, what? Workicide? And it is absolutely true, especially in the law enforcement community. So Stephanie Kiesow, welcome to A Badge of Honor podcast.
Hey, welcome, Stephanie.
Hi, Sam. Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
You bet. We'll tell everybody watching and listening about your background.
Yeah, sure. I'm Stephanie Kiesow, and I'm a former cop, the wife of a cop, and the daughter of 2 retired cops. So lots of police in my family. But if you count my non-sworn time, everything combined, I was in law enforcement for 16 years, the last several as a sworn police officer. And then before that, I was a dispatcher, all on the central coast of California. But ultimately, I left my cop job in July of 22, so almost 2 years now, coming up, because I recognized that I wanted to shift the energy that I was putting into helping the citizens in the communities into helping my partners, those that I saw really struggling. And so fast forward, I'm getting my Ph.D. in organizational psychology and specifically research work-related contributing factors to suicide within first responder industries.
Wow.
Now, you shared something with us before we came on that really was one of the big drivers to getting into psychology and examining suicide in the law enforcement community.
Yeah. So a big piece of why I'm so passionate about this work, aside from a lot of stuff that I myself experienced and saw with my partners, was in 2011. I was a dispatcher at the time, and I was dating a police officer. And ultimately, he died by suicide on duty, made the very permanent decision. And there were lots of organizational failures, lots of occupational traumas that weren't really dealt with on his end and the organization's end. And For him, he, like a lot of us, saw a lot of shit at work, to be quite frank, and didn't have really healthy ways of coping with things that he saw and experienced. And so he turned to things like self-medicating with alcohol, sleeping around because of the distraction that it offered, interesting money moves that felt really good in the moment, just a lot of impulsive pleasure-seeking behaviors as a way to cope.
That's that dopamine rush that you
Mhm.
need.
Yeah. And so because of a lot of accumulated traumas and then an IA that he was about to be involved in, knowing him as well as I did, I think for him, the thought of this IA, regardless of the outcome, sort of depersonalizing him because his cop job was all that there was to him. He like ate, slept, breathed cop work. Like that was it for him. I think it was just too much. And so on what I think he thought was his last shift before being placed on admin leave for the IA, he turned off his GPS in his patrol car, turned off his MDC, made the very permanent decision to die by suicide with his duty weapon just outside of his patrol car. And then in addition to seeing the contributing factors that led up to that, seeing the response or lack thereof in certain circumstances of the department was really eye-opening. And so kind of a lot of things combined gave me a big passion and drive for helping first responders that are experiencing a mental health decline because of the job.
You know, Stephanie, you bring up a great point in that story where you said that was his job, that was his life, right? He ate, slept, and breathed being a cop. And you know, it's funny, and I'm sure every law enforcement officer that's out there can identify with this, is that you are no longer Stephanie or Sam or John on your block or in your neighborhood when people find out you're John the cop, Sam the cop, Stephanie the cop. You know, you were always tagged with that you lose yourself, and now you are the job. And over time that really weighs on you in ways that you don't know how to comprehend, and you take on that persona and that role. Now you don't know how to be yourself anymore.
The S underneath the uniform.
It's true, and you end up becoming this person that you're really not. It's, you know, people in IBM don't become IBM, well, unless you're, you know, somebody, you know, who invented the company. But you know, you can't be your job. You can perform your job well, but you cannot become that person, that thing that they expect you to be, because you're a robot then.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think this identity component is so huge for our first responders. It's one of the big contributing factors that I found that contributes to first responder suicides, and I know we'll get into that. But this identity piece is so specific to first responders and to law enforcement, I think, because we sacrifice so much of our personal life. You know, I went through the police academy when my son was 1.5, my first son. And there were so many sacrifices that I gave up as a parent, as a daughter, as you fill in the blank. And so I think in addition to all the things that you mentioned, that's why we become so intertwined with this job.
You make excuses too. I mean, you were a new mom, right? So, you end up putting a job first. You end up putting a job before your family and going, oh, I'll just put him with the babysitter, or can you just watch him? I got to do this, and you start making excuses, and they almost sound to yourself like I'm doing the right thing, but really we're not. We're hurting those around us who actually care.
It's part of that Kevin Gilmartin's, that the first responders timeline that we review in our workshops, and you see everybody going, oh, yep, like ticking the boxes off. And that's really I think is an important eye-opening piece of what you write about in your book, is that we have to take a step back and remember that we are us first, accepting a huge responsibility as a role of a first responder, as a career. And, you know, it's not for everybody. It's just not. you have a calling, a deep-rooted, heartfelt calling for service, and service looks different for different people, but you know when it's there, because when you stray from it or something happens, it's like you don't feel like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it's not that you are the job, it's just you are so tied to that service piece that we need to learn how to make strategic shifts that allow ourselves to be fed in our personal life and our professional life. And you allude to that in the book. And you know what? We got to take our first break right now. When we come back, let's just take a deep dive into that topic and more from the book. We'll be right back, everybody. Stay tuned.
Interested in starting a podcast or TV show? Worried about what you'll say and how to keep it engaging? Think you'd like to be a guest on podcast, radio, or TV shows? Hi, I'm Susan Hamilton, owner and founder of OBBM Network, and I would like to invite you to an OBBM media training to get the tools you need for a relaxed and polished performance we'll be proud to share. Our specialized training techniques include role play, voice training, and everything you need to deliver a confident, clear, and engaging interaction. Go to offbeatbusiness.com. Go to the calendar and register for a training that's convenient for you. Dates available now, 214-714-0495.
Hey, welcome back to a Badge of Honor podcast with John and Sam with our special guest, Stephanie. Before we took for break, Stephanie was telling us about her long career, 16 years in law enforcement, but you are also surrounded by, your husband and your family. You've grown up around police and law enforcement probably your whole life. But another thing that gets me is you've taken on two of the most difficult roles as a dispatcher, which we are now finally starting to see how much trauma our dispatchers go through. But as a dispatcher and as a sworn officer out in the field. And those two components, how do they differ? Like, what's your views on that? How do they differ in stress and trauma?
Yeah, that's a great question. So from my experiences, I think I had more traumas as a dispatcher than actually as a sworn officer. And I think it's twofold. Again, my experiences, this is all anecdotal at this point, but for me, I was involved in more people's last breath on this earth as a dispatcher than I was as a police officer.
Wow.
Plus, I think the visual component internally is so powerful because as a dispatcher, I can't see what's going on, right? I answer the phone, I hear screaming, I hear whatever. My brain is creating a movie of what I think is happening. And oftentimes it's probably a lot worse than what's actually happening, but that is part of the trauma oftentimes that sticks with the dispatchers is just that visual component. And I recently saw a study that looked at suicidal ideations for both police and sworn police officers and dispatchers. And one of the interesting findings in that was that for the dispatchers, they had an increased suicidal ideation than sworn police officers. Now in this study, they didn't try to investigate why, but I think that those two components are really big.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And, you write about the stress and trauma in your book. It's called Workicide. And with not only from your background, but what we're seeing organizationally. And, again, let's talk about some of the highlights or lowlights, however you want to work it, because while the suicide rate is decreasing, there's many different reasons for it, whether, I don't know, they're correct or not, because we have a reporting problem and nobody wants to be a chief of that department that has, a tremendous amount of problems, like Chicago, which doesn't seem to have a turn off switch. And they're just not getting it at all. They say that they're doing stuff, but we know from talking to people that are formers and currents. It's not happening. They're just, lots of smoke and mirrors. What are some of the things that officers are doing to themselves to create, kind of this mental and physical hardships that they're feeling?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think it's important to maybe take a step back and identify what workicide is. So workicide isn't suicide, which is death by self. It's not homicide, which is death by other, but workicide is death by career, either in a figurative sense or perhaps a literal sense. And so because I was so interested in the organizational and occupational aspect within law enforcement specifically, what I found and what has been corroborated with tons of research from different researchers is that there's 3 most significant contributing factors to suicide, not just for law enforcement, but for any human on this earth. So the first one is isolation, either real or perceived. The second is what a researcher by the name of Thomas Joyner calls thwarted belongingness, but I just call it desensitization, or not desensitization, just basically low self-esteem, low self-efficacy, feeling a burden. And then the third one is what Thomas Joyner calls acquired capability. And I just call it occupational trauma, desensitization. But basically what he opines, and that has been corroborated, is that in order for us as humans to die by suicide, we all have to overcome this very ancestral internal self-preservation tendency that we all have. And so in order to overcome that, you would need to acquire a certain capacity for suicide. And so things that desensitize us to our own pain and suffering and death can be looking at others' pain and suffering and death, which what if first responders and law enforcement go on calls for all day, every day? Pain, death, suffering. And so that desensitization, especially within law enforcement, is what I tend to focus on a lot in my research these days, because of how prevalent and different it is from other industries. So those are the 3 big ones that have been identified. But I think the fourth one that sort of was missed, at least for our industry, is what we talked about, is this identity piece. I call it identity devastation, just basically any loss, confusion about our identity, because there upwards of 70% of us feel like we as a person are defined by our work. And so, we all have a sense of purpose and fulfillment from our job. It's how we introduce ourselves to others, right? Like I am a blank. You don't say that you are in law enforcement. Most of us say, I am a cop, I am a blank. Right. And so because of a lot of different variables and I am statements and just reinforcements, again, this identity piece is really big, especially within first responders. And so going back to your question, Sam, I think anything that we can do, any strategies that we can do to decrease isolation, to decrease this sense of burdensomeness and mitigate, because we can't prevent desensitization. We have to go on our calls for service. But if there are ways to mitigate that, that is what we need to look at going forward.
And what would that look like?
Yeah. So it's different for every individual, right? What might work for me may not work for you. But in the book, I use the acronym WARRIOR to kind of identify strategies to either implement, to look at. But the acronym of WARRIOR stands for wellness, awareness, resilience, resources, identity, openness, and routine. And so that kind of gives a roadmap for certain aspects that will hopefully decrease those things that we talked about.
Wow, and really easy to remember. And so thank you for that, John, right?
I remember it all.
and John, if you have a picture for John, even better. My warrior right here, my little Spartan, if you can see, I'm pointing at him, her right there. I think it's important, because when you can give those strategies, those tactics, those tangible tools, where you don't have to keep going on another research project, because when you're hurting, when you're suffering, it's like your brain is already on overload. So thank you for laying that out. Thank you for making it simple in the book. And, you know, you can tab the page, boom, let's talk. Let me go see what Stephanie recommends. And then do just 1 or 2 or 3.
Right.
And it makes all the difference in the world.
Stephanie, let me ask something. With your vast career and being around law enforcement all your life, when we talk about mitigating the trauma or the mental health issues, you know, when we look back on other fields like say air traffic controllers, or when we look at airline pilots who do have stressful jobs as well, they have an issue on the job. They're taken off. They're given time off. They're given counseling. They're given all this stuff. Our law enforcement doesn't seem to get that. I know our law enforcement, if, you know, I was involved in a shooting, and I went to the counselor, and they're like, "How you feel?" I'm like, "I'm feeling okay." They're like, "All right, go back to work." They just didn't care. And I see a lot of that happening. And when we see, you know, a young officer who had to perform CPR for the first time on somebody, you know, and then all of a sudden the paramedics come, okay, he's off to the next call. You know, now he's off to the burglary in progress. Or now there is no decompression time. There's no time to process that trauma. So we're swallowing everything into our bellies. And, you know, one day that's all going to come out. What do you think our culture should change throughout the country? And how so?
Yes, absolutely. And that is one driving factor for me in the work that I do. And I say it all the time. We have to change the industry here. This translates any specific agency, organization, department. This is an industry problem that we have. We don't normalize wellness is basically what it comes down to. We don't normalize mental health support, taking care of ourselves, of each other. You know, I work for and I work with many different first responder specific organizations. But one of the ones that I work for is called First Responder Wellness. And it's an inpatient treatment facility in California that takes first responders struggling with various things, alcoholism, PTSI, suicidal ideations, lots of things. And it hurts me so much because there's a high percentage of those that are currently right now in the inpatient treatment facility that are my folks' age, that are about to retire, had just retired. And it's ironic in a morbid sense to me because all throughout my childhood, my early 20s, even really my early 30s, you know, everybody would spout this suck it up buttercup mentality of just brush it off, you know, put it down with the brown, let's go out, have choir practice, go, you know, drink a beer, whatever the case may be. And it's like, how well is that working out for us? Not very well, because these are now the people that are checking in to the inpatient treatment facility because they need help, like dire help. And so I think, yes, as an industry, we are not doing a good job for our people of normalizing that we are going to be going through these really shitty calls and experiences and child deaths and bad TCs and all the things. And we're human. And it's not weakness. It's not lack of experience. It's not anything other than just a really complicated biological response that we have to really shitty traumas. And with that, we need more help. We need to get our first responders more help.
Good.
We'll talk about what that kind of help looks like when we come back from our next break. We'll be right back. Stay tuned, everybody.
All right.
Move freely, America, without medical restrictions or penalty. Without medical freedom legislation in place, our rights and freedoms are one vote away from being dissolved. Move freely, America, with one voice, without fear of retribution, achieving a common goal, medical freedom. We the people make our voices heard by connecting with state legislators and engaging a constitutionally compliant medical Bill of Rights for all citizens. Individually, change is improbable, but as an aggregate, attainable. It's time to act with one voice. My voice.
And my voice.
And my voice.
And my voice.
To protect our freedom, creating one voice that cannot be ignored. This requires your voice, too. Move Freely America. Go to movefreelyamerica.org to find a chapter near you. Plug in, donate, and help our legislators defend our God-given rights under the Constitution. Move Freely America. My voice.
And my voice.
And together with your voice, we're one voice that cannot be ignored. Donate today. MoveFreelyAmerica.org.
Hey, welcome back to a Badge of Honor podcast with John and Sam and our guest Stephanie. Stephanie, before we took the break, we're talking about the culture and the lack of services that a lot of law enforcement agencies across the country. Some are good, some are doing the right thing. So I don't want to bash everybody, but the majority are not. If someone, and I know this is a broad question, but if someone came to you and said, Stephanie, how can you fix this to decompress everybody? We want to change the culture. We're giving it to you. What would some of your ideas or your thoughts be to help fix the system?
Great question. I love it. I would probably respond with, there's three things that I'd recommend. The first is utilizing feedback via anonymous surveys, confidential interviews, just some way that we can give every employee within the organization a voice, figure out what the temperature is, right? Because a lot of brass and admin, they think they know, but they don't really know. And so having an actual quantifiable culture capture of where we're actually at is really beneficial, because we don't really know how to get somewhere if we don't know where we're at right now. And so that would be the first thing. The second thing I would say is having the organization encourage a multifaceted identity, right? Like we've been talking about this whole show, we are more than just our jobs. And because our agencies, our departments are so tunnel visioned about just the professional aspect, we forget that these are humans. These are people that have families, that have hobbies, that have other things outside of the job. And so cultivating and encouraging a multifaceted identity is really important. And then lastly, I would encourage everyone, organizations, leaders, slick sleeves, doesn't matter, to be familiar with what's called the 8 dimensions of wellness. Because wellness, quote unquote, is kind of like this magical unicorn that we're all chasing, but don't really know how to get, right? But when you break it down, the 8 dimensions of wellness are actually 8 different dimensions that are interwoven within each other. It's not just one thing, it's 8 things. And so the 8 things are environmental wellness, right? Do we have positive, stimulating environments around us, both at home and at work? 2, physical wellness. How's our sleep, nutrition, physical activity? 3rd is occupational wellness. Do we have personal satisfaction from work? 4th is financial wellness. So do we have low stress, satisfaction with our money situations, which is a big one because this financial piece is a major contributing factor and leading cause of divorce. And so that's a huge one. 5th, intellectual wellness. Do we have ways of expanding our knowledge and skill, which it sounds like we're all doing here today talking, right? So check that one. 6, emotional wellness. Do we have, again, healthy ways to cope? Because again, if we don't, we will, just as humans, everyone, we will resort to impulsive pleasure seeking as a way to cope. So that emotional wellness for the first responders, for the police officers, is especially important. 7 is social wellness. Do we have a sense of connection with others? Again, big contributing factor to that isolation piece that we talked about. And then lastly, spiritual wellness, which doesn't necessarily have to involve church and religion, although it certainly can, but just basically the premise is, do we have a sense of purpose, meaning in life? And so, I very much encourage departments to use these 8 dimensions as briefing topics, as, monthly newsletter topics. Incorporating all 8 within their agency is going to help to normalize that this is something that needs to be at the forefront of our mind.
That's great, but how do you keep cops, and cops, and Sam knows cops, and we all know cops, every one of those 8 dimensions that you just said, if we roll it out into a survey, if we ask those questions, what's the answer going to be to every one of them? I'm good. I'm fine. I'm okay.
Yep.
Right? Because we're all scared of getting that gun taken away. We're all scared about getting put on desk duty. We're all scared about the stigma that's going to attach to us. So we all lie We all lie on.
Well, it's the time factor too that we use. We all say, I'm fine and I don't have time because I got to get to the overtime that I keep signing up for that contributes to the Workicide circle. I'm working myself into being not mentally and or physically well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that is something that I get pretty passionate talking about because so in preparation for this book, I wanted to interview lots of people because I didn't want it to just be about my story, my journey, my experiences. And so I literally interviewed hundreds of people, clinicians, other first responders, lots of people. But for the clinicians who, I mean, I probably interviewed over 100 easy. I don't know the exact number, but I would come to them and I'd be like, hey, so this is the problem as I see it. Lots of first responders struggling because of organizational stuff, occupational stuff, lots of trauma, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. What do you say about that? And every single one of them would come at me and say, yeah, you're not saying anything new here. Yeah, we all know this. And one clinician said it to me this way. They said, expecting a first responder to not be negatively impacted by their job is like expecting someone to walk through water and not get wet. And I was like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But then, to be honest, it kind of pissed me off because I was like, well, if this is just so normal, especially on the clinician side of things, no shade to anybody who is that's listening, but if this is so normal, then why was I never, as a police officer, as a dispatcher, why was I never given training on this? You know, like if this is such a normal
if we know about it,
right. Yeah, why did no? And you know, like I went through hundreds of hours of training to learn, you know, what if somebody's trying to kill me, or if somebody's trying to kill others and kill me, like hundreds of hours, right? But not one of those was, what if the person who's trying to kill me is me because of my traumas, because of everything that I went through. And so I think when we put it into perspective for each individual first responder and their organization and really break it down, I think they start to understand stigma is literally killing us. So how can we move forward and decrease that stigma?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, we're starting to get some comments in our live stream, but we got to take our next quick break. We'll get to those comments and we'll be right back, folks. Stay tuned.
Look, when you need to respond to an aggressive situation to protect yourself, your family, or your property, understanding your firearm and legal position are critical. Officers know your skills are only as good as your commitment to training. So know what you're doing. So when you're in a vulnerable situation, we can count on your response. Whether you're a beginner or a licensed gun carrier, Carry in Texas offers basic firearms training, Texas permitless carry courses, license to carry, and basic 2A courses so you can understand the responsibilities, situational awareness, and learn the technical skill required when you carry your firearm. Go to carryintexas.com to find the right course for you. Join me, former United States Secret Service agent Samantha Horwitz, on the range for beginner basics, LTC prep, and range practice. Go to carryintexas.com today. That's carryintexas.com.
Hey, welcome back to A Badge of Honor podcast with John and Sam and Stephanie, our guest today. And before we took a break, we were talking about how Stephanie would like to see the culture change and how some of her perspectives on how it could change and the tools that are needed. You turned around and I was thinking about this. You said that saying about how do you expect somebody to walk through water without getting wet, right? Okay, well, give them a dry suit. Give them the tools. Give them that dry suit and they can walk through a puddle. Give them a pair of, waterproof boots and let them walk through. And, we're not giving them the tools or we're giving them the tools, but we're not teaching them how to use them properly. That's probably the biggest thing. Or we're not giving them enough time to use those tools. You can buy a brand new saw and it's sit in your garage, but if you're working so much, you're not going to be able to do anything with it. So that's, and I know in California, a lot of departments brought in a lot of physical training and yoga and meditation. I saw a lot in the fire departments, and I don't know if they're bringing that into the police departments as well. Do you think that's something that should be implemented as maybe not mandatory, but as a, hey, this is part of your job?
Yeah, I think it depends, right? Like you can have the best wellness coordinator, and you can have the popular thing now is a Zen den, and you can have all these nice shiny toys and objects, but if nobody trusts the culture, if nobody trusts those within the organization, you're basically just pissing away money. And so
like if I walk in there and somebody sees me,
right. Yeah. And so for the organization, two things that I'm really big on in helping leaders increase that trust and normalizing the usage of these wellness initiatives is twofold: instrumental support and informational support. And so instrumental support is basically therapy, just any way that we can provide emotional assistance. And so I am a big fan of not only providing free and confidential therapy and counseling for the first responder, but for their families as well, spouses, kids. Because again, as a spouse and a kid of first responders, I can confirm your work shit affects me, your family, right? But there's not a lot of resources for me as your family. So that is huge. And so another organization that I work very closely with is called the Counseling Team International. And so through them, they provide free and confidential counseling that the department actually pays for each month. And so that's a really great model for other organizations to look at replicating. And then that informational support side is educational programs, trainings. Again, it needs to be two-pronged. It needs to be allowing our people the emotional assistance to cope with what they're seeing, but then also informationally, like you said, give them that dry soup, give them the information, the education that they need to prevent or mitigate these issues going forward. So it's both.
Yeah. And you know what, we have KV is on the comment stream, and a lot of organizations or a lot of departments, I should say, haven't gotten either teamed up with or, are connected to groups that can do therapy. So if the officer wants to use their own insurance, and we've got, the whole insurance game where your deductibles are so high because, you can't really afford insurance. It's getting absolutely absurd where it just makes it like I can't even afford it. And I think that there are a couple of bills, at least in Texas and other states, that are starting to be proposed and or passed, where the departments will cover therapy. So now we're up against looking at the fine print in that, because nobody wants to be reported as, hey, you used XYZ. So we still got that barrier to go over. So I say that there are organizations out there, grassroots nonprofits, that will pay for a few sessions. Here in Texas, we have great friends with Assist the Officer. They will pay, I think, up to 6. And there's some other organizations as well that will get you at least discounted or free sessions. So don't be afraid to kind of go on to if you're not seeing something in your department, they're not putting that information out there, to kind of let your fingers do the walking in the Google or whatever search engine you use to see how the funds can be provided for you.
Let me add something to that real quick, Sam. Stephanie, you were talking about the hundreds of hours of training that you went through for if you're going against assailants or whatever, and we all have those. We have all these training to kind of normalize this. If everybody was required every 3 months or every 6 months to go to 16 hours of mental health training, right? It's a requirement now. Just like you're going to you got to go fire your gun every year and requal,
Quarterly, yeah.
Quarterly or whatever. So you make it that it's now that's the norm. Everybody goes for 16 hours of mental health training, and that's it. Will it work? Who knows? But it kind of brings out one step to normalizing. Oh, I gotta go see the shrink. Okay, whatever. And now everybody starts going, yeah, I had to go last week. And you may make groundbreaking progress with those who are doing this. Just make it a mandatory thing, like any other type of training.
Or bringing programs to the department. So,
yeah, it's starting to become more popular here in California as these mandatory annuals, as they're usually called. But yeah, basically where the department will pay, you just go once a year. You sit in front of a culturally competent therapist, clinician, whoever. You don't necessarily have to talk. You just got to show up. So if you want to show up and twiddle your thumbs for 45 minutes, then that's on you. But at least you're there in front of this professional. And I think that's important because, you know, we all go through and pass a psych eval, right? To become a cop, a dispatcher, most often we have to pass this like very extensive psychological evaluation. So we know that these people are healthy prior to the job, thus because they got hired. So we owe it to them as an organization to take care of the people who are suffering, who weren't suffering before they came into this job. And so, you know, for the leaders and the organizations and the brass listening, I hope that that is the message that we are trying to give off, that we need to take care of our people. It's just a moral obligation at this point.
You know, it's funny you say that because it brings us back to one of the workshops me and Sam did, and we were at this certain state and a department, and we found out that a guy who just retired, he did, I think, 30 years on the job, right? And he died by overdosing, right? And they failed to call it a suicide. And I thought to myself, I said, well, for 30 years, this guy did no drugs. He went all clean through his drug test, everything, right? Now, less than a year after he retired, he suddenly ODs on a narcotic. That's right. You know, that's job induced. Just like you just said, man, it's job induced, and we gotta look at that. Yeah. And we could have probably taken care of that if we did what you said.
Absolutely.
And I think too that it's not just the traumas, right? I think our brains kind of go to like the critical incidents that contribute to that end result, as unfortunate as it is. But one of the things that has been established on the psychological side that I think not a lot of people know about is that exposure to just routine work stress for our first responders via toxic workplace, awful leaders, being cussed at and spit at by the public because we're public enemy number one, right? Like all these things that are specific to law enforcement, that has a more significant impact on psychological distress than the accumulation of all the critical incidents that we go through. Right. So this routine occupational stress exposure is a significant risk factor, not only for psychological distress, PTS, but suicidal ideations. And so therapy is important not only for the critical incident aspect, but just for dealing with all the shit that we deal with as a cop, as a first responder.
Absolutely. Right. Absolutely. You know, we got to take our last quick break, and we will be right back to talk about where people can get the book and how law enforcement can do our business smarter, just like our commercial is going to say. Hang on.
To the Health Engineer Show. I'm Cliff Buckley, the Health Engineer, right here on the Offbeat.
Hi, I'm Larry Corkamp.
Hi, my name is Susan Hamilton, and you're watching Offbeat. Hi, this is Doreen Milano. Welcome to Big Ideas Small Business, where we will be talking to Carrie Arjala.
Hey, welcome back to a Badge of Honor podcast with John and Sam and our guest Stephanie. And we've been talking about, you know, how we can change the culture, how we can really start to heal mental health throughout the industry. And, you know, you talked about before we left, it's not always a critical incident. It's that, you know, it's the psychological trauma of being hated every time you go to work. If you go to work and you're being spit on or being called a derogatory name, and not only by the criminal element, because you could take that, it's when our leaders and the general public has dehumanized you, and you feel like you're not making a difference anymore. You took a job that you ready to put your life down at any minute, and you know people really around you are starting to hate you, and that's really not the truth, because the people who love you just don't speak up enough. You know, the people that really love what police do across the nation probably outweighs those who hate us, but they don't speak up. And that's why it's so important for the public to thank somebody, thank an officer, tell them, hey, how grateful you are to. That will change your perspective of an officer's attitude tremendously. If you just thank someone, say, I appreciate you for what you do, that uplifts every officer. And we don't have that. That's where we lost a lot of it.
Yeah. And I think the vital piece here that needs to be studied, which is what I focus on the majority of research these days, is that routine work stress that we just talked about, right? Not only does this cause psychological distress, but what it actually has found is that someone that has increased work-related stress, they actually have an increase in stress response to critical incidents. So if I'm stressed because of my boss and all of the internal BS that's going on, and then I go to a critical incident, my stress response is going to be through the roof compared to someone who's not going through those organizational challenges. And so if work stress causes a psychological distress, which causes stress responses to critical incidents, and then can evolve into PTSD and depression and all those things, which therefore can turn into suicidal ideation, suicidal behaviors, death, then like reverse engineered, that is our starting point. We need to start, the law enforcement industry, we need to start at that routine work stress level, that organizational and occupational aspect. And so ways to do that, again, boosting individual wellness, organizational support and training, normalizing therapy, not just for the first responder, but for their relationships, for their families. These are the things that we need to put money towards and prioritize, especially right now.
You know, I kind of relate it to domestic violence. You know, man or woman, you go home every day and you're getting your ass kicked at home, or you're getting beaten up, or you're getting dehumanized at home by your spouse, right? You're going to self-implode, right? Our officers are going out being dehumanized by the public that they're trying to help, and they're going to implode one day.
Yeah, we can only take, so much before our bucket gets full, and then it's got to spill out onto something, or unfortunately someone, and that doesn't work out so well, especially in terms of relationships. Stephanie, how can people connect with you and get a copy of the book?
Yeah, so the book, which has become a bestseller and a #1 new release, which I'm so excited about.
Congratulations. Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, they can get it on Amazon, or they can go to my website, Stephanie Kiesow. My last name is spelled KIESOW.com, either way. But I think just sharing the information, sharing the book contents will help a lot of people that might be struggling. So please reach out.
Yeah.
If you
And you speak in departments, you speak at a lot of different conferences. So if Stephanie is coming to your town, to your municipality, maybe she's been booked at your department, which, hey, if you're listening, you can book her. So go ahead and do that. Attend one of where she's speaking, and you can learn everything that we've talked about about her book and beyond, and put it into practice in your own life. Because when it comes down to it, yes, we can ask the departments to do X, Y, Z till we're blue in the face. Ultimately, it comes down to us, to you, to take the action to make things better. And sometimes we got to claw and we got to scrape and we got to ask a million times, and as annoying as it is, but you're worth it. And we want you here. We don't want you being a statistic. Being added in, Stephanie's second book. We don't want that. So connect with Stephanie. Again, for those of you who are watching, it's right on the screen. For those of you who are listening on your favorite podcast app, Stephanie Kiesow, and her last name KIESOW.com. You can go there. Stephanie, any parting words?
Oh, 5 stars. I'm going to say, I'm just looking at the website.
Yeah, 5 stars. Yeah.
5 stars. 5 stars on the Amazon rating.
Yes, yes.
That's huge.
Thank you. I appreciate that. My parting words is, if we want to create lasting, sustainable, positive change within our organizations, that starts with us, like you said, Sam. So if we want to be impactful within our organizations, we have to be impactful with ourselves and our families first. So let's focus on us first.
Amen.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you so much. This has been super powerful. Again, folks, go out and get the book. And Stephanie, you know, if you've got any upcoming appearances, whatever, you know, send it on over to us. We will put that out for sure. Thank you so much for being a guest and really enlightening, letting us know the down and dirty about Workicide and what we can do about it.
Yeah. Thank you, Stephanie. It's a pleasure.
Thanks.
All right. Take care. Well, super powerful. Awesome. You know, it goes to, if you don't have the connections through your department, you know, look and research the connections. And if it's as easy as going on to badgeofhonor.org. That is our website. We've got a tremendous amount of partners and resources, whether you need that connection to a therapist, or a program that can serve you at no cost or very little cost. Go and check it out there. All you have to do is scroll down to our partners resources, click on the logo, boom. You've got their contact information. It's also a place where you can find out our events and what's upcoming. What we just got through, you know, Memorial May culminated in the Dallas Memorial March, Carry the Load. We want to thank Carry the Load and everybody who took the time and gave from their hearts, the generosity that you showed us and Carry the Load through the donations that you made. Forever grateful. As you know from watching this, we are Carry the Load nonprofit partners, which means we're part of their Continuum of Care program. So a portion of what Carry the Load brings in comes back to us and goes right to our first responders, so we can help them understand the things that we spoke with Stephanie about. And maybe if they're interested in getting stuff, you know, kicked off in their department, they can be a catalyst for change. And that's what we are all about. So everybody who tunes in every week, thank you so much for watching, for being a part of a Badge of Honor podcast family. Keep clicking that like button. If you're new, click the subscribe button and that little bell if you're watching on YouTube, so you'll never miss an episode. And to our X Live family, to our Instagram Live family, Facebook Live family, LinkedIn Live family, thank you so much. All of your comments, all of your support, all of your recommendations for podcast guests to be on. This is all about getting the information out there so that we can be better in the jobs that we do. And if we're out of law enforcement, like John and I now for, which seems like forever, it's a way for us to continue to deal with the stuff that kind of creeps in every once in a while. So thank you for being our resources as well. And to all of the law enforcement, all of our first responders out there, know that we are praying for you every single day. Like John said, there's more of us out there that support you. You don't see it, first of all, because of social media. I can tell you the positive posts that we put out there, I can tell you it doesn't go anywhere. Facebook. Yes, I said it.
Yeah.
You know, when I get John and I, we know our followers, and you know, if we either get no likes or one like we're not stupid. So we know that social media is not putting it out there, but know that you have a tribe, you have warriors out there that are, we 100% support you in what you do. To our military veterans, you know, D-Day, wow. Just thank everybody for putting up the posts, for thanking our soldiers. Freedom is not free. And it's because of what those men did for us that allows us to speak freely and tell people to F off like I just did. Because of you. And because without that, without our freedoms, we wouldn't get to do a show like this. And to all of our active duty personnel that is fighting the good fight across the globe, thank you for keeping us safe, our shores here. John, take us home.
You said it all, Sam. Big thank you going out to all law enforcement. Just remember, you're not a robot. You need some oil every once in a while to keep your motor running. Please take care of yourself. It's be transparent, open up, and you'll see self-healing comes with just talking freely. But until then, man, peace.
Yeah. See you next week, everybody.
A Badge of Honor podcast is produced for the OBBM Network podcast and protected under copyright law. For content permissions, please submit your request to abadgeofhonor.com on the content page. For OBBM Network programming information, please call 214-714-0495 today.